people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. You may have heard already that the undercard for Shields versus Marshall is officially set. We already knew that the co-main event to the main event, Michaela versus Alicia Bountgartner, was a done deal, but there does appear to be a lot of Olympic talent set to make an appearance on this card.
People over there at Sky Sports and Boxer have unleashed their stable of Valkyries.
Guy's arching stall.
And Lauren Price are set to make appearances on the card. Lauren is going to be taking on Tamia Bellick. Karis is going to be taking on Marina Sakharov. Caroline Dubois will be taking on Melina Koleva. That's not all. Unbeaten up-and-comers Shannon Ryan, Ebony Jones, Virginia Fuchs, who we talked about in my previous video.
They're going to be fighting as well Sarah Liegman.
Unbeaten German up-and-comer Sarah Liegman, who we've mentioned in passing here on the channel.
She's going to be taking on Beck Connolly.
April Hunter will be returning to action as well against Erica Juana Gabriela Alvarez. April Hunter.
April, who has since rebounded off the loss she suffered to Kirsty Bavington late last year.
She got herself back in the winner's bracket when she returned to action in April of this year. Won a points decision over Konechka. She's going to be fighting on this card.
You know what I wouldn't mind seeing? I wouldn't mind seeing April Hunter versus Summer Lynn.
Summer Lynn from right here in the US of A, Windy City, Chi-Town, Chicago, boxing out of the Body Shot Boxing Club, whose career is handled by the legendary Rick Ramos. I think Summer Lynn versus April Hunter is a fight that makes a lot of sense down the line.
I think Summer Lynn versus Sandy Ryan is a fight that makes a lot of sense down the line.
I also think Sandy Ryan versus April Hunter is yet another fight that makes a lot of sense down the line.
Great time to be a woman boxer, that's for sure.
That's what this card communicates. The people over there at Sky Sports and Boxer are putting their all-star stable of Valkyries to work to good use in September on the undercard of Shields versus Marshall. The only potential hindrance, the only potential drawback of an all-female card.
Well, it harkens back to a conversation I had with trainer and manager extraordinaire Rick Ramos.
You know, Rick told me. He told me a long time ago. He doesn't really like the idea of an all-female card, an all-female show, because in a nutshell, boxing is boxing.
Rick told me that he doesn't like the idea of an all-female card because there's less chance of spillover.
Less chance of attracting the eyes of the traditional boxing fan that may not otherwise take in a women's boxing match. If you integrate the girls with the guys, if you don't separate them, you have more chance of spillover. Somebody that might not have started out watching female fighters, female boxers, may end up watching them if you integrate some of those female fighters on shows.
Shows that feature familiar male fighters.
Doing an all-female show might seem like a nice idea on the surface, but it reeks of novelty.
That if you really want to grow the sport and attract new eyes to it, new eyes to some of these female pugilists, these female prize fighters, you got to integrate them with the guys.
What you got to do, because they may already be more familiar with the guys than they are with most of the girls. The sport is still growing after all. You think about who's fighting on this card. Ebony Jones, Shannon Ryan, April Hunter, Karis Artingstall, Lauren Price,
Sarah Liegman,
Virginia Fuchs. And what you will notice is a lot of these fighters are in the early stages of their careers, the beginnings of their careers. They have not yet familiarized themselves with the boxing community at large. They're not notoriable, not known, not yet.
So when the casual observer that takes in a lot of boxing, mostly guys, doesn't see a familiar face on the card, a familiar face on the show,
well, it may be a bit more difficult to attract that set of eyes, that set of ears. It may be a little harder to attract that viewership. I myself love the card. I myself am familiar with all of these fighters, up up-and-comers and champions.
But I'm not everybody, and everybody ain't me.
Not everybody is as familiar with all of these female fighters as I am, having tracked their careers for a very long time. They won't be as well-versed. They won't be in the know, in the loop, and that may...
There might be challenges. I think that Rick was onto something. What Rick Ramos told me some months ago, it did make a lot of sense.
But I am still very much excited about this card, the main event and the co-main event. The entire card in its entirety, and many of these familiar faces that are at least familiar to me in these careers that I am currently tracking. I very much like the show.
Although that is something to think about, this being an all-female card.
What this displays is Sky Sports' continued commitment towards growing and developing female fighters in the sport of women's boxing, which really is just boxing, because boxing is boxing after all.
Good fight's a good fight, whether it's two guys, two girls, two squirrels.
Two winos at a soup kitchen. It's quite beneficial to a female boxer, a pugilist, especially in that part of the world, that there are at least 3 or 4 major platforms, 3 or 4 major promotional outfits that have female fighters fighting on these platforms, have female fighters under contract.
Do you remember what I told you when Matchroom officially parted ways with Sky Sports?
That Sky Sports' continued involvement in the sport of boxing for male boxers and female boxers, it would yield that many more opportunities for these pugilists, because you wouldn't be limited to trying to get on a Matchroom show, just a Matchroom show or a Queensbury promotion show. You'd have the Sky Sports platform and whatever shows they're putting on. Those opportunities.
Very exciting time.
Historic ones, you know. Alicia Bountgartner versus Michaela feels like a main event unto itself, and it could have been billed as one. I wish it were.
Let alone Shields versus Marshall, that very exciting situation. This is a very good card, to be honest.
In men's heavyweight news, I'm sure most of you have heard by now that my suspicions have proven accurate over time. Deontay Wilder versus Robert Helenius is likely October 15th at the Barclays Center to headline a Fox Sports pay-per-view.
So Fox Sports hasn't left boxing yet?
Apparently not. Deontay Wilder will return to the site of several of his most memorable knockouts to start his comeback. BoxingScene.com has learned Wilder is likely to box Robert Helenius on October 15th at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, in what would be the former WBC heavyweight champion's first fight in more than a year. Wilder versus Helenius is expected to headline a Fox Sports pay-per-view show 53 weeks after Wilder suffered an 11th round knockout loss to Tyson Fury in the thrilling third fight of their trilogy.
Not a bad opponent choice, if I do say so myself. Robert Helenius is coming off of 2 back-to-back wins over Adam Kavnotsky.
Whereas Deontay Wilder is coming off of 2 back-to-back losses. Deontay Wilder, who will turn 37 on October 22nd, has posted videos recently on Instagram of him training at his gym in his hometown of Tuscaloosa, Alabama. The 6'7" knockout artist has spoken about retirement following his second loss to Fury last October 9th at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, but he appears committed to returning to the ring. Wilder has looked leaner in those videos than the Wilder who came in at a career-high 238 pounds the day before he fought Fury for a third time.
Is Malik Scotch still going to be training him?
Well, he might be. We'll just have to wait and see. From the moment that the Robert Helenius versus Adam Kavnotsky rematch was placed on the undercard of Deontay Wilder versus Tyson Fury, I knew that heralded a potential fight between them, a potential fight between Deontay Wilder and Robert Helenius.
I said Fury was just going to beat Wilder again, and that Robert, he'd beat Adam Kavnotsky again.
And that in the wake of the third fight, we might end up seeing Deontay Wilder versus Robert Helenius if Deontay doesn't decide to retire. That's one guy you can expect to see him share the ring with.
Because his ring return is being tabbed for October, it will have been approximately a year's time since Deontay Wilder saw action.
The same applies to Robert Helenius, who fought on Deontay Wilder's undercard. They're on even terrain when it comes to that category for what's supposed to be a Fox pay-per-view.
Fox, who according to insiders is pretty much done with boxing. According to Marcos Villegas
of Fight Grub TV, Fox is pretty much done with boxing. They don't front the money for pay-per-views and they get a cut. It's PBC paying for production costs of the pay-per-views.
Wait a minute, if Fox ain't even fronting them the money to put on these pay-per-view shows, then why are they getting a cut?
Well, it's because these pay-per-views are still happening on Fox's network, after all.
The situation between Fox and the PBC is even more dire than I anticipated.
If what Marcos is saying is true, that's essentially saying that Fox doesn't think it's worth it to spend any amount of money on their boxing programming at this time. And it's up to the PBC to foot the bill to put on their own fights. Fox doesn't want to waste money on it anymore, if this rumor is true. If this story checks out. Will the same ring true when it comes to Deontay Wilder, who normally makes more than your average PBC fighter? It takes a lot of money to get him in the ring, at least more money to get him in the ring than, say, Gervonta Davis or Jermell Charlo, Errol Spence Jr. Deontay Wilder has gotten substantially bigger guarantees than those other PBC fighters have.
And he has put up bigger numbers on pay-per-view than those fighters have.
Neither Gervonta Davis or Errol Spence Jr. or the Charlo brothers or Andy Ruiz, Luis Ortiz, those guys who have made appearances on pay-per-view independent of Deontay Wilder, none of those guys have put up close to 1 million pay-per-view buys the way that Wilder did alongside Tyson Fury in their second fight.
So yeah, he has gotten bigger guarantees than those guys have.
And where Fox might not feel so inclined to spend any amount of money on their boxing programming at this point, will the same ring true for Deontay Wilder's ring return? A return that I think will yield some commercial value. More so than many of the other pay-per-views they've been putting on. I believe there's a genuine interest in seeing Deontay Wilder return to action regardless of who's opposite the ring. Though he's got a pretty decent dance partner in Robert Helenius, who at least in his last 2 fights has looked the part.
I mean, it's going to take more money to get Deontay Wilder in the ring than what you spend to get Gervonta Davis in the ring, Errol Spence Jr. in the ring.
It's costed more money in the past. Deontay Wilder's guaranteed purses have been noticeably bigger than Gervonta Davis's purses or Errol Spence Jr.'s purses. Are we to believe that the PBC is going to bear the brunt of all those costs, those operational costs and guaranteed purses? They're going to bear the brunt of that all by themselves with no help from Fox.
Well, I don't know. I remember after the second fight, Top Rank's Bruce Trempler said they lost money putting it on.
Lost money putting on that Tyson Fury fight. They lost money due to piracy. That while the fight did very well at the gate, 19 million, approximately 19 million, due to piracy, they still lost money on the show.
And I remember reading at that time that the break-even point was estimated to be 1.1 million pay-per-view buys. That in order to break even, cover all the costs, they would have needed to sell 1.1 million pay-per-view buys, and they didn't sell that.
They sold just under 1 million. When you think about the estimated guaranteed purses to the fighters for that fight, approximately $60 million in guaranteed purses. 30 to Wilder, 30 to Fury. You think about that, you think about the pay-per-view buys, you think about Bruce Trempler and what he said, that they lost money on the show due to piracy, and then you see this, by way of Marcos Villegas, that Fox is pretty much done with boxing.
That they're not fronting the PBC money for these pay-per-views anymore. That money's coming from the PBC directly.
You get the sense that Wilder versus Fury 2 being a box office flop, and the third fight selling even less pay-per-views than the second fight did, the second fight that was a box office flop, you get the sense that that's more or less how we got here. That's how we got to a point to where Fox don't want to spend any money on these shows anymore.
Because if the fight wouldn't have been a box office flop, then Fox would have been happy to front them the money for some of these fights.
If it would have been a financial success, I think the casual observer sees the number of pay-per-views sold and they tell themselves that it must have been a financial success, having did so well at the gate and sold so many pay-per-views, not realizing that it didn't break even. The operational costs to do the fight,
the operational costs exceed what the fight actually generated, i.e. you spent more money to do the fight than it brought you back.
You overshot it. You spent too much doing that thing. That's what that means.
Paid those guys too much money they weren't good for.
What that means, whether you like it or not. What's it going to cost to get Deontay Wilder back in the ring these days? A year, what could be a year, after having suffered his second defeat to Tyson Fury?
That's the question.
Boxing insider Rick Glaser reacted to this news, saying Wilder versus Helenius is a good fight, but definitely not pay-per-view worthy. It's on Fox pay-per-view, #Showtime. Boxing's Stefan Espinoza, smart to sit this one out. Probably didn't think it was fiscally responsible. I don't care how much they have to pay Wilder. This isn't a pay-per-view type fight.
Checks and balances, baby.
Risks versus rewards ratio, cost-benefit ratio. Showtime is accommodating a lot of PBC fighters at this time, more so than Fox is, and that's where likely the majority of their boxing budget is going, as well as attempting to get the Errol Spence Jr. versus Terrence Crawford fight over the line. They may not have it in the budget to accommodate the operational costs for Deontay Wilder's ring return, and Wilder hasn't fought on the Showtime platform since the Dominic Breazeale fight.
What's that, approximately 3 years and 3 fights ago?
This isn't the first time that people over there at Showtime may have decided to forego airing one of Deontay Wilder's fights. We know indefinitely that they did when it came to the Deontay Wilder versus Luis Ortiz rematch, a rematch that no one was asking for at the time, and a rematch that ended up being billed as a pay-per-view. Stefan Espinosa and the people over there at Showtime deemed it financially irresponsible to air such a fight. The risks associated with putting it on versus the rewards just wasn't worth it. Ended up going to Fox and brought in abysmal pay-per-view buys. Though this situation is somewhat different. You often hear it said that absence makes the heart grow fonder. I think that's true in the case of Deontay Wilder, more so than when it comes to some other fighters who are sparsely active. In this situation, when it comes to Wilder and his ring return, I think there is value associated with that alone.
Rick Glaser doesn't think Wilder versus Helenius is a pay-per-view worthy fight.
He thinks it's a good little fight, a solid little fight, but not worthy of a pay-per-view. Though I beg to differ. It's not the fight they're selling after all. The selling point of this match isn't the match itself. It's Wilder's return to boxing. Wilder's ring return. That's where the sizzle is, and that's what you're selling.
Listen, they put on fights like Ruiz versus Areola,
Yeah.
Luis Ortiz versus Charles Martin on pay-per-view,
Yeah.
Keith Thurman versus Mario Barrios.
I don't think it's at all far-fetched to say that Deontay Wilder's ring return could bring in more pay-per-view buys than any of those pay-per-views did, though this fight will be somewhat more expensive to put on, so long as operational costs are kept low. And they might be, because it doesn't take much money to get Robert Helenius in the ring. It's Wilder.
That's what's going to cost you.
Who's going to cost you? And so long as Deontay Wilder and his team are reasonable, they might be able to turn over a decent profit with this thing. I estimate that Deontay Wilder versus Robert Pelanius in the fall could generate anywhere between 350 to 400,000 pay-per-view buys. You heard that right. This is Fox we're talking about, not Showtime, a premium cable network with a substantially smaller subscriber base than Fox.
Fox ain't a cable network. They reach millions upon millions more homes than Showtime does.
With Fox as the bullhorn, the megaphone to advertise the fight and promote it, I estimate that this fight could at least do what the first Deontay Wilder versus Tyson Fury fight did. And that fight brought in approximately 325,000 pay-per-view buys, given everything that's happened, and that absence does make the heart grow fonder. At least when it comes to Deontay Wilder, I think this fight might even do a little better than that fight did with lower operational costs, so long as it doesn't cost an arm and a leg to get Deontay back in the ring.
The first Deontay Wilder versus Tyson Fury fight only had about $7 million in guaranteed purses to the fighters. 4 to Wilder, 3 to Fury.
And if we use that fight and those guaranteed purses as a template for this fight and what it might do at the box office, coupled with what you want to spend on guaranteed purses, the bulk of the $7 million would go to Wilder.
Can't expect to get $20 or $30 million coming off of 2 back-to-back losses with no title.
Not for fighting Robert Helenius, he can't, but if the guaranteed purses and the demands for them are reasonable, there could very well be an upside where Wilder makes more than just his guarantee.
Where the rest of the money that Wilder makes might be coming directly from the fans, coupled with whatever they do at the gate.
Whatever they bring in, and I think this fight could do a very good live gate. I think this fight could do decent numbers at the box office. You've got to play it smart, but there is an opportunity there.